Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
How much do you spend to get a new patient? If you're an average dentist in the United States, you're spending about $350 for any new patients you're getting from a mailing. These are actual new patients that show up in your practice. And you're spending about $422 on average if you're using Google pay-per-click. Now, obviously, these numbers can be made better if you know what you're doing. You can tune things up a bit and lower this acquisition cost, but that's about the average. So now that we know how much you spend to get a new patient, how much are you spending to keep that patient? Well, again, if you're the average dentist in the United States, little to nothing. And that's what we're going to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX, specifically how the average general dentist in the United States potentially loses half or more of their practice. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host, and this is a solo episode this week. No guest, just me. And this is a subject I want to talk about. I'm very passionate about, actually, because in my view, this is one of the things that in the dental industry is done very poorly. If as a matter of fact, if I were to pick the two most poorly done things in the dental industry, they are keeping your patient base active or patient retention and case acceptance. So this week we're focusing on patient retention. So let me walk you through this here for a second. So let's say you get me as a new patient, which you probably wouldn't want. No, I'm not a bad patient. But let's say you get me. I'm 52 years old. I'm not a bad patient. I believe I want to keep my teeth, and all that good stuff. And I'm a fairly compliant dental patient. But let's say you spent, I found you on Google. Dentist near me, I find you. I paid, I came in, your receptionist scheduled me. I need, let's say I need an implant and a couple of crowns. So that's a $5,000-$6,000 case, and you do it, maybe more. And now I go on to the recall schedule. So I'm on the recall schedule. I'm supposed to come in 6 months. And, it's getting close. I get a text to confirm my appointment, and it just so happens I'm going to be out of town that week. So I ask if I can reschedule. So I reschedule for another month or two down the road, and then something else comes up. Maybe your office is closed that day. We had some weather or something like this. So now I'm off the schedule. Now I get busy, or you get busy. And, I'm called a couple times. Maybe we play phone tag. We don't reach each other. I never get on the book. And then a year goes by. Now, this is not uncommon. This happens a lot. People get busy. People forget, etc. So now a year's gone by. No one's reached me yet. Maybe I'm not getting called as often because you don't have as many people up at the front as you used to. Then the second year goes by and I still have not scheduled yet. So obviously that to a degree is on me as the patient. You would expect me to call and schedule. And in my defense, and you'll see this happen to people with your patients, you may have a patient who hasn't been in the practice for 2 years, and then you point that out to them and they go, wow, has it really been 2 years? They can't believe it's been 2 years. They feel like it's only been a year. Time gets a bit strange and subjective in certain regards. But after about 2 years, you're doing a chart audit. Now, I tend to get called in chart audits fairly early because my last name starts with B. But let's say my last name starts with M. So chances are I'm not going to get called because the chart audit's going to start and you're not going to get to me because, you get busy and you don't have time to finish the chart audit. So sometimes people start at Z and they make themselves all the way back to P or N, but M never gets called. So now you've decided you can't reach me. Maybe you call me once or twice. You decide, all right, well, Jeff doesn't want to be a patient in this practice anymore, so you deactivate my chart. So let's actually take a step back and look at the amount of effort that went in to actually retain me. It was basically just a couple of phone calls, maybe a postcard, maybe a text that I'm overdue, maybe a call when there was a last minute opening. You had an employee spend maybe a total of, 15, 20 minutes over the course of several months trying to reach me or appoint me. Let's say you pay that employee $20 an hour. Okay, so you spent $5 to try to retain me. You spent $350 to get me, but you spent $5 to retain me. And it's not just me. I'm just talking about patients in general. I'm just using me as an example because here I am. So therein you see the big problem in dental practices. There's all this time and effort spent to get that patient in because new patients is supposed to be the solution to production. But then the patients that already know you, that maybe aren't the best about their schedules, maybe some are even, there's very little effort spent in trying to keep those patients. Now, let's track me forward a few years. Now, let's say something else breaks or I have some other type of a problem. Chances are I'm going to call you. That's just me speaking personally. But if I have no communication from you and then I'm talking to a coworker and they say, oh, I got this really great dentist you should check out. Maybe I check them out because I've had no communication from you, had very little effort to keep me in your practice. And the funny thing about the dental industry is you have built into your business model the idea. Crest and Colgate have done this for you. If you ask the average person on the street how many times a year they're supposed to see the dentist, they'll tell you right off the bat, 2. Supposed to go twice a year. That was the Crest and Colgate made that possible. All right. Any other business would kill for that. And what I mean is any other business where you knew you had to go into that business, physically present yourself more than once a year, twice a year to get checked on. Any other business would kill for that. If you were Restoration Hardware and you had to, as a customer of Restoration Hardware, you had to show up twice a year to tour the showroom, and that was just built into your mind, they would love that. Any other business would love that. You have that built into the American psyche, but it's not taken advantage of. And even more important than that, if you think about it, if your object as a dentist is to actually restore and maintain a patient's health function and aesthetic, you can't do that if you don't see them. And your hygiene program is not only a source of production, yes, but it's also the way that you keep patients coming back into the practice to maintain their health. So it's integral to the overall success of not just your practice, but of your patient's health. And, if you want to really look at this from a big, larger purpose perspective, dental health is, someone's dental health, oral health is directly connected to their systemic health. You know this. As a doctor, you know this. And so it's not just, you're actually not just making it easier for people to eat and chew or whatever, but you're potentially adding years to their lives. So this is sort of a big deal. So to give you an idea of how this might be working in your practice, I want to do a little bit of math with you, which I know is tough on a podcast, especially if you're driving. Please don't do the math while you're driving. Maybe the person sitting next to you can, or you can pop this back in and do this later when you get in. And I hate doing math over a podcast, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's not that difficult. But I want to give you an example of something we call the Hygiene Formula, where you can sort of check the overall health of the hygiene department in your practice. So I'm going to give you some sample numbers so you can sort of see how this works, but then you can throw your own numbers into it to sort of see how it works in your practice. So let's say we take this practice and it's a doctor with 1.5 hygienists. So roughly 6 days of hygiene. Office is open 4 days a week, and they've got a 4-day-a-week hygienist and a 2-day-a-week hygienist. They do have a soft tissue management program, and new patients do go through hygiene. All right. So we take this doctor and we say, okay, doc, how many patients, individual patients, have you seen over the last 5 years? 5 years. The first time you ever do the hygiene formula, you're going to use this factor of 5 years, and you'll see why in a minute. So this doctor looks and says they've seen 4,000 patients over the last 5 years. All right, so we take this number, 4,000. We then multiply that number by 2, because you figure every patient is minimally going to need 2 6-month checkups, 2 6-month recalls. Some will need 3-month recalls, 4-month recalls, but let's just say 6-month recalls. So we take this 4,000 number, we multiply by 2. That's 8,000 recalls a year. Now, let's say this office is like the average office and has not been very good at retention. So we're going to take some patients out of this equation, to account for attrition, as well as patients that have moved out of the area or patients that just aren't coming back. We're going to take a big number out of this. We're going to take 40% away. So out of this 8,000, we're going to subtract 40% of these recall visits, which is 3,200. That essentially leaves us with 4,800. 8,000 minus 3,200, 4,800. That's 4,800 potential recall visits a year if you were to take all the patients they've seen in the last 5 years after subtracting 40%. Now, we then look at how many weeks a year is this practice open? Let's say this practice is open 50 weeks a year. There's 52 weeks in a year and the doctor takes 2 weeks a year off. Practice is closed. So the office is open 50 weeks a year. So we take this 4,800 number of potential recall visits, and we divide it by 50. That gives us 96 recall visits a week, right? 50 weeks a year. 4,800 recall visits a year divided by 50 weeks, 96 recalls a week. Now, the average hygienist, we could say, could see about 8 recalls a day. So if we take 96 recalls a week divided by 8, that's 1 day of hygiene. That gives us 12 days of hygiene this practice should be seeing a week, 12 days. Now, one thing I want to point out about this is, this doc does have 6 days of hygiene. They should be seeing 12. You go, okay, they're at 50%. It's actually worse than that, because if you remember when I painted this scenario initially, this doctor has their hygienist. They have 6 days of hygiene, but the hygienists have a soft tissue. They're doing soft tissue management. So they're doing scaling, root plannings, and they're seeing new patients. These 12 days of hygiene, that's just for recall patients. The new patients and the soft tissue management patients go on top of that. So the office should be seeing 12 days of hygiene. They're really only seeing 6, but they're really not seeing 6 days of recalls. So now we want to look at what is this doctor's compliance percentage. All right. Well, they should be seeing 96 recalls a week. So we have the doc look at how many recalls a week are we seeing on average? Maybe they go back, I don't know. I'm a big fan of using the factor of 4 months because that's a big sample size. Let's say they take the last 3 months. The last 3 months, they're averaging 30 recalls a week. 30 recalls a week. All right? But they should be seeing 96. So their compliance percentage, if you divide 30 by 96, is 31.25%. 31.25% of the patients are being seen on a regular basis in hygiene. That means almost 70% are not. Now, you could say, all right, well, some patients are only coming once a year, like in my example I gave you with me, or maybe less. That's true. But the average out of those 4,800 potential recalls, they're really only doing 1,250, 30 a week, 1,250 per year, 31% compliance. So when you look at that, you go, okay, that means 70% of the patients are not regular, or they're not showing up at all, or they've just gone bye-bye. They're gone. Now remember, this doctor, some of these new patients were referrals, but this doctor spent a lot of money to get those new patients in the first place, and minimal amounts of money to keep them there once he or she got them. And therein lies the big problem. Now, if you want to extrapolate this further, let's take these numbers again. They're at 31.25% compliance. They're seeing 1,250 recalls a year when they should be seeing 4,800. If they were to just get up to 80% compliance from 30% compliance, let's say 77 recalls a week, how would that change the numbers in their practice? Well, if they were to do that, they would see an additional roughly, I have the math here, and I think it's going to get a bit much with the math, but let me just keep it simple and say that would add about $450,000 a year just in hygiene production to the practice. And what that doesn't account for is the patients that need treatment that are coming back in hygiene. And if I were to ask you, if you had to present a treatment plan to a patient who had actually been in your practice before versus a new patient, who would be easier to get acceptance with? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the existing patient, the established patient, even if they haven't been there all that much. So I guess the point of all this is just to point out that if you don't put a focus on retaining patients in your practice, which you could go, well, look, I do great customer services, patients will just want to stay. That's unfortunately not enough. You got to have a continuous series of reminders. Someone actually has to put some effort into this to make sure you keep them. And I've often been asked, well, how much effort? Well, let's take this scenario I just gave you again. Here's this doctor with, 4,800 recalls they should be seeing a year, and they're only seeing 1,250. If they paid an employee $40,000 a year to get on the phone and schedule hygiene patients, and that employee were to get them from 31% compliance up to 80% compliance, they'd add an additional 400, maybe 500 or 600 if you count the dentistry in there or more. By paying that employee $40,000 a year, they'd add $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year in collections to the practice, production and collections. And more importantly, you'd have more patients actually getting healthy. This is something that I keep campaigning about because if this is actually handled right, I've seen numerous MGE clients do this very, very well. It can be such a huge boost to your practice. And most importantly, it actually gets everybody healthy. It sort of fulfills the purpose that you're there for in the first place. So that's my 2 cents on that for this week's episode. I was going to keep it short and I wanted to, throw this out to you. Now, I do have a spreadsheet of the hygiene formula that you can download on the episode webpage where you can enter your own numbers and it'll give you your hygiene department compliance if you want to use it. We also talk about this subject quite extensively at the MGE New Patient Workshop. If you want to check that out, you can find that at newpatients.net. Again, I have the link on the episode webpage. Otherwise, folks, listen, put some attention on that hygiene area. If you want any help with it, you can give us a call here at MGE at 800-640-1140. You can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. And I'll see you guys at the next episode. Thanks.